I see some familiar faces in the audience today, but for those of you whom I have yet to meet, my name is Eric Clopper, and I'm the spokesman of Forjen. Joining me here today is Forjen president and founder Vincenzo Aiello, one of our senior researchers, Dr. Eric Clopper, and my colleague Eric Cunningham. Now for the next 12 minutes, I'd ask you to approach this presentation with an open mind. As a fellow scientist and entrepreneur, we here understand the importance of critical examination. We know that science, business, and medicine are fraught with misunderstandings and social biases that are only clear in hindsight. It's true that we don't have all the answers, and we do the best with what we know. And once we know better, we do better. How this relates to Forjen is we are dealing with an issue that has enormous cultural and psychological implications that are only obvious to outside observers, but not easily discernible to those of us raised within the culture. In a sentence, what Forjen does is we are a seed-stage regenerative medicine company seeking to adapt the latest advances in the field to regenerate the only body part that 1 in 3 Americans are missing. Over 100 million Americans and well over 600 million men worldwide, which is the male foreskin, to restore natural form, feeling, and sexual function to circumcised men. Which often begs the question, why just the condition of being circumcised? Anyways, why just the condition of being circumcised? Well, let's use an analogy. Some of you here may have noticed that I'm wearing glasses. What happens when I take my glasses off? I can still see. I can see the general shapes of people. I can orient myself. I'm not going to fall off stage. But at the end of the day, I only have partial vision. However, when I put my glasses back on, I can see the entire room in vivid detail, down to the facial expressions of those of you in the back, with my corrected entire vision. Sounds obvious, right? Well, it wasn't for me. See, when I was young, I was decent at sports, but one notable exception was baseball. To the despair of my Little League team, I managed to bat a 0 for 2 consecutive years. And they threw the ball pretty slow back then. I had no idea why it was so bad. The reason was, apparently I couldn't see the ball, and it was out of my realm of consciousness. And I just unwittingly assumed that everyone saw the way I did. It was out of my realm of consciousness that the eye could see with such range, depth, and clarity. Now the point of the story is, once I realized I had a sensory deficit, I corrected that sensory deficit, and my quality of life improved drastically, along with my batting average. Now how does this relate to the problem that Forjen is addressing? Well, I'm sure many of us have had pretty mundane conversations about eyesight and corrective lenses, but how many of us, and you can raise your hands if you like, have had in-depth conversations about how much pleasure we receive and wear in our penises? Probably none of us is my guess. However, in a 2007 study in the British Journal of Urology, they did just that. They studied the sensitivity differences of the circumcised versus the intact penis. Now, if we take a look at the sensitivity diagrams, with purple and red being the most sensitive, what we see is the most sensitive part of the circumcised penis is along the circumcision scar line. However, if we observe the uncircumcised, or more appropriately named intact penis, what we see is the most sensitive part of the intact penis is the entirety of the foreskin. So in other words, the most sensitive part of the circumcised penis is the scar line of where the foreskin was removed. Which, when I talked to some of my adult friends who were circumcised in adulthood, they said the difference is between night and day, black and white in color, which makes sense because most of their nerve endings were in their foreskin. So if you were circumcised, you were like me before I got glasses. You can see just fine to function, and you may even unwittingly believe that's what everyone sees or feels. But you have no idea what your penis is truly capable of because you've never had the sensory tissue necessary to feel the sensations you're supposed to. So instead of thinking of Forjen as glasses for your penis, think of it as regenerative medicine. Think of it as LASIK eye surgery, but with regenerative medicine. Let's be honest. Putting lasers in your eyes doesn't sound too appealing either, but it works beautifully. Think of Forjen along the same lines. But Forjen is more than just restoring natural levels of sexual sensation to circumcised men. They're actually functions of human sexuality that are in the foreskin, which is why it has evolved to be part of our reproductive organ. Which brings me to my next question. You saw the sensitivity diagram, which are great, but what actually is the foreskin? Now this is a valid question. Most Americans have no idea. I myself didn't know for 2 decades, and by no stretch of the imagination are medical professionals exempt from this gap in knowledge. And the reason is, medical professionals, especially older ones, grew up in the age of mass circumcision in the US, with rates as high as 90%, meaning they never had a foreskin, never saw a foreskin growing up, and studied from medical textbooks that omitted the foreskin, as if it's not part of the penis. Now this is truly mind-blowing. I need you to grasp this reality to understand this presentation. It's a reality that would make Orwell himself shudder. We have censored a human body part of great value, out of the public's consciousness. Now this is a direct result of growing up in a genital-cutting culture. Now reality can often be quite discomforting, and this is a prime example. So let me clear up the misconceptions. The average male foreskin is 12 to 15 square inches of the penis. As shown on stage, it's composed of 4 major parts. I actually have one with me. Don't worry, it's just a model. But as you can see, the 4 major parts, we have the outer foreskin, which is just a continuation of the shaft skin, which covers the glands and internal organs, keeping it sensitive throughout life. We have the inner foreskin, much like the inner mucosa of your mouth. We have the frenulum, a highly sensitive tethering structure, and then we have the ridged band of the foreskin, also known as the lips of the foreskin. Because like the lips of the face, the lips of the foreskin provide transition from skin to inner mucosa. And also like the lips of the face, the lips of the foreskin are densely innervated, with approximately 10 to 20,000 fine-touch nerve endings, also making this known as the male G-spot. Ever wonder why ribbed condoms exist? They're trying to recreate the ridges that every man comes with standard issue. The foreskin is also responsible for all the natural mobility, lubrication, and sensitivity preserving functions that the penis evolved to have. So once it's removed, not only is the quantity, quality, and range of sexual sensations sharply reduced, but the mechanics are permanently and drastically altered, which can manifest itself in sexual pain and or discomfort for both partners, the effects of which are pronounced as the circumcised male ages. Now, I realize it's not immediately obvious how this butterfly shape is a foreskin. Very few people actually guess when I show them. So if you take a look at this composite, it shows how the foreskin is a bilayer tissue that wraps around the head of a circumcised penis. Now, this is a rough visual representation of an existing surgery that has poor clinical outcomes. And the reason is you can't simply graft skin and expect it to act like a foreskin, which you now know is an extremely confusing misnomer because it's actually highly specialized mucosa. So what we're doing at Foregen is using existing surgical techniques, but with the proper structure to restore natural form, feeling, and function of circumcised men. Now, finally, to recap, because that was a lot of information, probably the most that anyone has heard about foreskins in their life, is the foreskin is responsible for most of the sensation during intercourse, all the natural mobility, lubrication, and sensitivity preserving functions, and lest we forget, to help stimulate the female as well. And the problems Foregen is addressing is one, a major sensory deficit. Now, just as you can never fully appreciate a kiss if you have your lips amputated, you can never fully appreciate sexual intercourse if you have your foreskin amputated. Meaning, if you do not have your foreskin, you will live your entire life without ever having a natural sexual experience because you physically lack the anatomy to do so. Now, this extremely unfortunate reality explains why some men vehemently defend their circumcision because they are not psychologically prepared to deal with this loss. Other problems we're addressing are any sexual and or erectile dysfunction that results from circumcision. Now, it's a common observation that circumcised men often rely on lubricant for intercourse and or masturbation, which is an imposed sexual handicap. And the reason is the part of their body that deals with natural lubrication has been cut off, so they have to replace that function with a synthetic chemical lubricant. There have also been numerous studies that link circumcision with higher incidences of erectile dysfunction and or sexual dissatisfaction for both partners, making this a very promising market to address. And finally, pain is women's #1 complaint in intercourse in this country, and the reason is women are engaging in intercourse with men in this country, with men who do not have the penises they were born with. The female evolved to be stimulated by the non-abrasive pressure of the male's erectile body sliding in and out of the foreskin, not the friction of an immobile circumcised penis. To remove a massive amount of form from the penis and expect not to affect its function is simply naive and exhibits fundamental misunderstandings in Biology 101, evolution, and the history of circumcision, 99% of which has been an outspoken attempt to control and repress male sexuality, which is radically opposed to our current cultural values. The U.S. is one of the only countries in the world who does this for supposed medical reasons. It's also the only country in the world that has multiple billion-dollar industries that rely on the continuation of circumcision, with companies whose sole products are derived from foreskins, harvested either from infants today or likely yourself if you're under 30 years old and circumcised in this country. But I digress. The point is, circumcision is a big problem in this country. So what are we going to do about it? We are going to regenerate the foreskin. Now, this is a somewhat unusual pitch. for a number of reasons, but one is I spent most of my lot of time talking about the problem. I'm going to briefly outline the business plan, our team, and our value-added milestones to bring this technology to market. Now, as we all know, regenerative medicine works by taking a breeding mold, seeding it with cells, and then you get that regenerated body part. Now, there's two ways to get that mold, either the cadaveric or the manufacturing method. Now, the benefit of the cadaveric method is nature makes the vascular networks, but it's harder to mass manufacture because it requires a donor. However, with the manufacturing method, it takes years of R&D to develop, but it's easier to mass manufacture. Therefore, we're going to develop and commercialize the cadaveric method first, and then move on to the manufacturing method. Now, the business model is actually quite simple. There's three phases: tissue supply, tissue prep, and tissue application phase. And how it works is we take our adult tissue from a European tissue source, then decellularize that tissue to get a foreskin mold, and then apply that to the patient to receive that mold and have that regenerated foreskin. Now, we already have our adult tissue source lined up. As you can see, Forj would comfortably occupy the tissue preparation phase. We already have our adult tissue source lined up, our incubators, initial researchers, and surgeons. In terms of publicity and marketing, circumcised men have been wondering literally for millennia why their penises look and function differently than most men's in the world. As a result, we've been covered by these major news organizations this year alone, just when they got wind of our proof of principle research on animals. We're also working on a feature-length documentary with Hollywood A-list actor Alan Cumming as the protagonist, along with myself and prominent physicians, ethicists, and human rights attorneys. And it's called Pigs Without Blankets. We thought it was kind of funny. We don't be deadly serious about everything. In terms of our scientific team, it's led by Dr. Elena Bondioli, who has over 10 years in decellularizing and regenerating tissues in a clinical setting, with dozens of publications and numerous patents, as well as her lead biotechnologist joining us here today, Dr. Valeria Pabor, who has a PhD in the modulation of cell growth factors and as well a wealth of clinical experience. In terms of our management team, Foregen was started as an idea 5 years ago by former Vatican mosaic artist Vincenzo Aiello. He's assisted by his VP, Carlo Sirioni, myself, the spokesman, Eric Clopper. Our head of visual assets and head of IT, Peter Benson and Benjamin Morrison, respectively, joined the board. And Eric Cunningham, who's joining us here today, who helps direct social media, with 7 other social media moguls. On our scientific advisory board, we have 2 consulting plastic surgeons, a pathologist who specializes in the harm of genital cutting, and a senior research technologist. We're very receptive to the idea of bringing on an experienced life science CEO to decrease the time needed and increase the likelihood of successful exit. Now, for the last slide, I promise, we have a 5-year, 5-phase plan to bring this technology to market. The first phase is to raise $1 million using the new provision of the Jobs Act to develop and validate a method to decellularize the foreskin and ensure that it can hold cells ex vivo regeneration. And this is going to be done through an equity-based crowdfunding. The next round is to conduct a preclinical animal trial, make sure there are no adverse effects from our therapy, as well as make sure that the scaffolds are properly reseeded in an animal model, and then continue on to a prospective clinical trial. The final stage would be to build a large-scale processing plant to decellularize these foreskins, make these molds, as well as secure adult tissue sources, get FDA approval, and secure intellectual property on all of our processes. By 2021, we expect a revenue positive and expanding company ready to IPO. And I know I've got about a minute left, so I really want to communicate that Foregen is more than just a regenerative medicine company focused on a body part that has been grossly misunderstood for millennia. We represent an evolution in our species' consciousness, moving away from the cutting of our children's genitalia while simultaneously ushering in a new era of healthcare, one dominated by regenerative medicine, by introducing an application to the mainstream that makes sex better. To do this, though, we have to, as Bernie said last night, defy the status quo. Not do what is popular, but rather do what is intelligent. Now, if you believe in this project morally, scientifically, or economically, I encourage you to join us in our equity-based crowdfunding campaign in 2016 to make genital integrity a reality for either yourself, a loved one, or the hundreds of millions of men in the world who have lost it, as well as make a sizable return on your early investment in this revolutionary company. Thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate your attention with such a touchy topic. Myself, Vincenzo, Dr. Pabor, and Eric Cunningham will be around for the rest of the stem cell summit to answer any questions. I promise you we're very nice people, and on stage for a few minutes to answer some questions. Thank you.
So I have lots of questions on that one, but let me see, that one's the, I don't want to work blue though, so I would go to that one, go to that one. So what's the what's the strategy for crowdfunding? What are people going to get for their $1 million?
So in terms of crowdfunding, so the new law in the Foregen Act is you can actually, so it's like investing in stock, but you don't have to be an accredited investor.
Right.
And what that does is it democratizes investment in early companies, which I think for this unique issue that intimately affects 200 million Americans is particularly symbolic.
Right, but what's someone going to get? So $1 million gets you, I mean, maybe it's a question that you don't even know yet or what have you, but, 10% of the company, 5% of that, have you figured out, kind of what the valuation?
In terms of valuation, we're working with some attorneys now to incorporate, so we're not, I don't want to say something and then have to rephrase myself.
Sure.
So,
Well, the main question is, have you figured it out yet? I don't mean the specific.
we're working on the valuation now. As you know, it's difficult to value a company without IP, and both the entrepreneur and investor have to agree. And since this is a new method of raising money, it's yet to be fully defined.
Yeah, okay. And then, do you have intellectual property yet?
So we've done some initial proof of principle research just to make sure that decellularization techniques on animal tissue, animal foreskin works, and it's worked well, but it wasn't novel enough to get IP, so we have not yet secured IP.
Okay, great. All right, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Caleb, I don't envy you following the penis guy.